Everything that you do generates data and is valuable to somebody. We hear a lot about UBI, Universal Basic Income. The part I disagree with is some sort of top-down government, tax the rich, put it into the other people. That type of centralized control isn't ideal. If we can unlock data from all different aspects, monetize it, and then pass back the revenue from that, that's UBI from bottom up. And I think that's much more sustainable. It gives people motivation, and it gives them some earnings so that they can sustain themselves.
Dear crypto community, blockchain buddies across the globe, welcome back to Cryptonites. We're here at the Paris Blockchain Week Summit. Look behind me, you can see the Paris Stock Exchange built in 1728, a beautiful picturesque backdrop. And today we have another mind-blowing guest, Bruce from Ocean Protocol. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Nice to meet you. Yeah. Glad to be here.
You killed it, by the way, in the last talk. You know, when we're talking about data monetization, we're gonna go into some really exciting stuff. But before that, I'd love to ask you, Bruce, about yourself. A simple question: why? Why this space? What made you fall in love? What are the sequence of events or a specific moment in your life that make you feel this is for me?
I've always tried to find something that resonates with me. And I spent about 12 years building banks around the world, helping to develop financial systems in places where the financial system wasn't as mature or developed. And I was building banks, and it meant something to me. And I could see the results of what I was doing. At the end of that kind of phase of 12 years of building banks, I found myself at a loss of what do I do next? And that's when I discovered Bitcoin. I had been reading a lot about inequality and how wealth is shared and transferred in society. And I was also reading forward about AI, robotics, and automation, and seeing that there was potentially less and less for humans to do. And when I looked at blockchain, through my friend Trent McConaughey, my co-founder, I realized that blockchain isn't just transfer of value and transfer of currency, it's also potentially transfer of data, intellectual property, music, books, blogs, ideas, designs, all these things. And if what we can do is create some sort of rails on blockchain for this type of thing, we could give pretty much every human on Earth with a connection to the internet, with a computer, the ability to monetize their ideas and have a chance against the AI, the robotics and the automation that's coming.
That's amazing. With regards to Bitcoin itself, so you were in traditional banking, TradFi. Was there a aha moment or a light bulb moment where you thought, okay, this makes more sense to me, I'm done doing this, I want to change the purpose of what I'm doing on a daily basis?
It all came together around 2012. I'd been taking courses at MIT. I just finished building my 12th bank. I was a little bit burnt out. And I was also thinking about kind of the greater good. And so that was the moment where I said, what is the value of Bitcoin? And to me, it was clear that it was potentially a store value, was a way of exchanging. But if you could put that with money and digitize money, well, what else is already digitized? All the books, all the ideas that we have. And if you could put the layers of financial model, all the sophisticated tools and products that we have on top of ideas, we could create trillions of value around the world. All 8 billion people have a way to interact with the world in a more equal way, with equal on-ramps that aren't controlled by the platforms, aren't controlled by the governments, and give people as much power as possible.
That's amazingly put. And you just mentioned store of value. Don't you find it difficult to really define Bitcoin, that it's constantly evolving relative to times? I asked this question to Eric Voorhees, who's on the show a few months back. I said, what is the definition of Bitcoin? Like, some people call it electronic cash, digital gold, but again, it's so difficult to define. How do you define it these days?
So the way I think about it is Bitcoin and the network is two things. It's a database, number one, of entries of just who owns what. And then it is an orchestration tool for then transferring that from one person to another or one address to another. That's all it is. Whether it's going to be digital currency, whether it's going to be rights of ownership to data, whether it's access to a social graph or identity. That's all it is. It's a database. And it turns out that registries and databases are extremely valuable. If you think about something like a government, what's the value of a government? Most of it is having a registry of births, deaths, cars, insurance, health. These are all just registries, but it's immensely valuable. The second thing that what governments do is risk management. All the risks that the regular capitalist market don't cover, we give to government, whether that's like external threats like wars and stuff like that, defense, environmental things, water, sewage, all that kind of stuff. These are all government types of services. And so with Bitcoin, with blockchain, as a database registry and the ability to orchestrate the value, that's what Bitcoin is to me, or at least the concept of a blockchain with Bitcoin. And that's why you can see it transferred to everything else now. That's why DeFi is exploding. That's why NFT, gaming, data is on the cusp. All these things are coming because people are realizing that if you can orchestrate these interactions using smart contracts, it reduces the cost by 1,000 times and increases access by 1,000 times. So how can that not be good for society?
How can that not be good for society is a great question to ask. Great rhetorical question. In terms of politics, so you mentioned earlier that you're interested in politics. Is Bitcoin also a political statement in some ways of freedom, of... Yeah, please, I see you nodding already. So
it's a little bit of a leading question, but yes. I think everybody viscerally feels that we've given a lot of power to entities where we don't control things. Everybody talks about the internet platforms having kind of using us as the product, and we don't really have transparency of that. The ways decisions are made in government or in central banks or all these large entities, we don't have any control over. And I think blockchain allows us to transparently see what smart contracts do, what they're for, and to interact with them on a much equal and level playing field. It allows all 8 billion people on Earth to participate in the financial system, to share their ideas, to transfer value without any intermediaries. And I think that that's a fundamental right that we should all maintain. And that transparency is something that is a political statement because it says, no, we're not going to put up with giving up control to unaccountable entities who might only be profit-driven, or who might want to manipulate us, or who might not have our best interests at heart.
You mentioned smart contracts. Obviously, like Ethereum is also another protocol that you're interested in, and you find, great use cases. Like, what made you then realize, okay, you were into Bitcoin, like this makes sense. I'm transitioning. I'm out of here, TradFi. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, wait, Ethereum, that's pretty interesting. What were some things that made you feel like, okay, this is also something I want to dive into?
So we started in crypto in 2013. We were the very first company that put kind of NFTs on the blockchain. Unfortunately, we put it on the Bitcoin blockchain, which is very fickle to work with. It didn't work. It turns out that as a contractor, we had a fellow by the name of Vitalik Buterin work for a couple weeks on this concept of essentially NFTs on the blockchain. And we like to think that maybe some of his work for the short period of time helped influence his vision of what a Turing-complete kind of blockchain could give, which became Ethereum. And it's essentially that second part which I talked about, the orchestration. The orchestration of business logic around a registry service is extremely powerful. And that's kind of like the genesis of where Ocean came from. We tried to do a lot of things in the Bitcoin world. Back then there were things like colored coins and forks of Bitcoin and all this kind of stuff. We had to build everything from scratch. And now, thank God, we have a ton of L1 technologies like Ethereum, like Polkadot, Matic, and a bunch of other ones, where people can instantiate this type of business logic on there in a much more efficient way. And we have like all these tools now, like wallets and onboarding ramps, MetaMask, all these kind of things that really help people to onboard, to developers to build tools and stuff. And so we're just grateful that, for instance, our technology can live on any L1 EVM compatible chain.
That makes a lot of sense. The tooling, especially since 2013, has changed drastically.
Yeah.
What are the finest technologies that have really inspired you in terms of innovation, where you felt, wow, this is great innovation, besides the smart contracts?
When I think about how far we've come since 2013, 2020, it's like 9 years. It reminds me of back in the day in the mid-90s when everybody started getting dial-up internet and that kind of awkward, annoying, like high-pitched screech. And it took like 30 or 40 steps for people just to like configure their router, download the software onto their computer through disks or whatever, and then get that modem working. I think that the tooling of Web3 is following a similar kind of development, and soon it will be very simple for people to onboard and for people to build tools. And people weren't really able to build software tools before something like Windows and then app stores, because there wasn't operating systems. There wasn't like kind of a framework for developers to kind of attack this. And now we're at the stage where you can, launch a mobile app in one day, and now you can launch smart contracts in one day. And with this type of tooling, I think that allows for us to disintermediate billion-dollar companies with a single smart contract, like what DeFi is doing, Uniswap. That's essentially disintermediating a stock exchange. What we're doing in our stuff, we're disintermediating data marketplaces and the entire kind of value chain of intellectual property, where you have to claim copyright, find a data marketplace, publish, find consumers, all that sort of stuff. All that goes away with smart contracts.
With regards to this speed of innovation you're talking about, is the source of it thanks to open source code? Is that really the key to the speed of this evolution that we're seeing, or are maybe other things perhaps?
One of the things that really heartens me in the Web3 space is that we bootstrap this with very little funding. I think the total funding in the entire space has been about 20 billion, and meanwhile the value created is about $1 trillion. There's almost no other technology that's created so much value. And it turns out that Union Square Ventures, based in a VC based in New York, had struggled with the idea of funding open source projects, because open source projects, the code is open. You have no kind of
no IP.
Yeah, you have no moat against other companies that just copy and paste your code and then add to it and do whatever the heck they want. And I think blockchain allows open source projects to win, because you're funded by the community, you release a token, you kind of commit that your code is open, and anybody can build on it. So even if your project doesn't succeed, that code is always going to be around for people to access. And that type of reusable building block structure for open source allows for innovation to go warp speed. It's the antithesis of things like patent protection that block out innovation for 20 years until the patent expires. That is not something that I feel makes sense in today's world, because we got so many more bigger problems to do. We got to help, help people monetize their assets and digitize their assets, but we also got big problems to solve with the environment, with, I guess, global governance and stuff like that. And I think that open source software allows for this to happen much faster and is accessible globally.
Beautifully put, Bruce. Amazing how you're framing this. And obviously, you're a thought leader when it comes to data monetization, and you are the data guy. I'll always remember this, Bruce. We had this virtual conference called Blockdown, for those who don't know out there. And I remember at the end, the last question was, what is the most meaningful thing that you'd like to share relative to data through Web3? And I'll always remember one of the speakers said, I'm going to let Bruce take my time, because he'll have so much value in what he has to say that I don't need to speak, which I thought was very cool. I saw the bromance in the chat.
Wow.
So I love to ask you, Bruce, like in terms of your vision, so you're a thought leader, what are you thinking about these days with regards to data through Web3?
So we've spent 5 years building Ocean Protocol. We've been in space for 9 years, but the last 5 has been on Ocean Protocol, and a lot of it's about building the data economy. What are the pieces that we need to build the data economy? And obviously a data economy is multifaceted. There's a whole bunch of different aspects to it, and we're discovering a lot of this. One of the advantages of a startup is that you ask all the stupid questions, and you struggle. So you don't take what's happening in the Web 2 space as being the Bible and how things should be done. You ask questions. And so we've been building kind of the core building blocks, a general agnostic technology that can handle any data, the publishing of it, the transferring of it, and the monetization of it. So that's about to be released soon, in the next couple months, our version 4. And as that has been closing, my next question is, so how do we get a data economy built on this? How do we make it so that people publish data and then other people understand the value of that data? That's the main challenge that we have for, I think, the next couple of years. And we have a couple of solutions. The first one is something like data bounties. And that's where we encourage publishers to publish data sets. Then we run a bounty. It can be 3 flavors. Number 1 is, what's the value of this data? Give it to the community. Let us see what the ideas are. Gives the publisher the context to understand what do I have here. Then the second bounty is, okay, great. Now we have context. Write some algorithms. Write some analytics. We give prizes for that. If people are able to write analytics that are used and reused over time, then both the data provider and the analytics provider get money. They get transaction. They can buy the data. They can buy the analytics. And then the third type of bounty is a challenge. I have a problem. I think the solution is in this data set. If you can solve the problem, you win a prize. And so that's one way that we're going to be able to build a lot of context around data, because data is valuable in different contexts. If you're a hedge fund and you can trade off the data, let's say make 10 millions off it, that data could be worth $1 million to you. But that same data set, if you're a university researcher, might only be worth $100. Different contexts, different values. And so that's our goal, is to try to find a value for data in the appropriate context. And then if that works, then we think that data scientists are going to start consuming the data. And then we have a nascent data economy starting.
You have so many players within that, right? And how do the tokenomics work, like with regards to creating this incentive economy and this incentive model?
So as part of the Ocean token, we had always reserved 51% for incentivizing data. We didn't really know how, but we had a couple of hypotheses. And it turns out that in the last 5 years, what's happened is that you can get yield off tokens, yield farming. One of the ideas that we have is to take that 51%, not release it into the public supply, into the circulating supply, but rather use it for yield farming, and then take the proceeds and drop that into data farming, drop that into data bounties. And that way it's evergreen. It never goes away. You never dilute the supply anymore. And then you're essentially subsidizing the activation of a data ecosystem with no cost.
Fantastic. And those get distributed, they can be distributed in stables or any type of token in that sense?
Yeah. So how does Ocean make money? Number one is anybody who uses the protocol, we take a 0.3% cut. We think that's fair. It's like almost nothing. 99.7% goes back to the people who are sharing the data or orchestrating it. So that's what we think is fair. Another thing is we're going to take, as I said, the 51% of the tokens, put it into yield farming, take that, and then we're going to split that up into various things, like the Ocean DAO, which is a grants DAO that the community decides where it goes to. It funds developers, outreach, marketing, whatever the community wants. They decide. It also will fund data farming. So as people consume data, they're earning money, plus they'll get a bonus from data farming. That's another program that we're working on where if you have consumption of algorithms, you have consumption of the data, you're also going to get a bonus on top of that through data farming. So we think that that's kind of the package of incentives where you can then start marketing your data. You can start building a complete business off of the data. We can have one data set that's publicly traded in the future, and people are incentivized to make that data set better. People are incentivized to add algorithms to that data so that more uses can be found for it. And maybe a data set becomes worth $1 billion someday.
Question of the week. So guys, how do you monetize your data? Let us know in the comment section below. Thank you so much, and you may be eligible for a prize. Woo! So would that be the next step for Ocean? Is kind of like creating this marketplace for people to actually sell that and transact on a peer-to-peer basis?
So we actually have that already right now. We have the marketplace, and now the goal is to actually get context around data sets. Just look as an example. What happens if we were to get the entire data set of MasterCard global? They already sell that. I don't know how much they earn off it, let's say $1 billion a year. What happens if we can make it so they earn $10 billion a year because we've crowdsourced 1 million new algorithms on top of that data set for uses that they might never have thought of. Their sales team have never even considered selling it to governments or NGOs or whatever, startups. And I think that we can build data sets that become essentially publicly traded, spun out of a company, but then the crowd starts making it better and better over time, and it's owned by the community.
Fascinating. Could it be like some sort of like auction?
Yeah, sure. So in the pricing mechanism, you can have, for data sets, you can have kind of ownership of the data set, or you can have access to the data set. So access can definitely be auctioned. So let's say you're a hedge fund, and you want to be the first to get this data set in the first 10 seconds. That could be auctioned off. The next 10 seconds, auctioned off to a different person. And in that way, you have, once again, in a specific context, that data being worth $1 million, and then a week later, it's worth $100.
Yeah, so many people have used it after that, right? So
exactly.
You're incentivized to actually get it first at the highest price and make use of it.
Yep. And you can also auction data sets. That would be less of a use case, but then what you're saying is, I'm transferring this data set ownership 100% free and clear to somebody else. I'll auction it. You can do that, or the way that we would prefer is that the owners of that data, the people who provided that data, get a fraction of the ownership, and then they share in the ownership. I think that allows for that data to be curated, refreshed, cleaned, and just a whole bunch of stuff happening to that data in a good way, so that data maintains and grows its value. And then the access rights can then be auctioned off in various NFT forms, fungible, non-fungible tokens, etc.
That was my next question, because you thought about NFTs in 2013, built it on the Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah.
Like, is there a component where you can play more with NFTs and be more creative with this marketplace that you're building?
So in our V3, which was released late 2020, we had data tokens, which are essentially ERC20 tokens, access tokens for data. So if you own one of these, then you could access that data set. We put it into Balancer, and the price was floating based on who was staking on it, who thought that data set was valuable. And so that was giving kind of a liquid price for data. That helped to price hard to price assets by creating these concept of data tokens, putting it into a Balancer pool, and then allowing the community to curate which were the best data sets. With V4, we extend that concept to who owns that data set. You encapsulate that into a data NFT. And that means that as an NFT, I can do a couple things. Number one is I can own that NFT, and then I can transfer it over 100% to somebody else, so they have the full rights to it. What I can also do is create sub-licenses on a data NFT. So this data set has, let's say, one NFT or one sub-license, which is also an NFT, that allows for the first 10-second access. I auction that one. There's one that allows for kind of long-term access, so you have access for the last 7 years of data. That is fixed price, $100. And there's 10,000 of them because I want university researchers to have access to that one. And people can start trading that one. There could be like a streaming access. So for radio stations and Spotify. So if it's a radio station, I can say, okay, it's in one geography. I have 30,000 of these tokens. That's worth $2,000. You can buy that. You'll have streaming access to this data if it's a song or something like that. And then you could have, like, for something like a Spotify or an Apple Music, it's a much higher thing. I'm selling that for $1 million each. And then you essentially, from this one data NFT, you can create multiple sub-licenses that allow you to monetize your data in the different contexts where it's economically viable.
Beautiful. Wow, I love the complexity yet also the simplicity, right? It's like combining both of them. For those who are out there and they need a call to action, right? They're now really excited, like, okay, Bruce sold me, I want to get more involved and interested in this data monetization thing. Like, what are the first steps people can take, to start engaging in this economy?
So I assume that anybody who's kind of listening will already understand MetaMask.
Yeah.
That's it. So the two ways after you understand MetaMask is, number one, what are data sets out there that could be published to Ocean, and then let us know if we can put a bounty on it. We're going to put $10,000 bounties on every single data set that gives us a heads up, and we can do a campaign on, and that gives context around the data set. If you're a data scientist and you're into crypto, the second thing is to look out for these bounties and participate. Write algorithms, write analytics, put context around the data set, help build the Ocean community, and win a prize. Be a part of the community. And these are kind of the two ways that we're going to together build a data economy, show kind of use cases, and then bring in all the other normies who aren't yet in crypto.
Fantastic. And for those who are like my grandma Susie, still know MetaMask, are there any easy solutions, or is it too a bit immature besides maybe Brave Browser, where people can start at least gaining a little, not necessarily making a lot of money, but just playing with it a little?
So I'm big on the idea of data unions. What is a data union? A data union is nothing more than some organizing entity. It can be a DAO, or it can be like an existing Web 2 company who says, that's enough. I don't want to be selling my users' data, or I've always promised to myself that I would never sell my users' data without their permission. And for them to set up a data union saying, but I have all this fitness data. I have 50 million people on this platform. I've collected the data from them. Why don't I give them the chance to opt in to make their data available on Ocean? And that's maybe how somebody who's not in crypto can start earning money on their Ocean, because then that data gets published. We'll run a bounty. We'll get context around it. You'll have 100 algorithms. Those algorithms will be run on a daily basis. Every time the algorithm earns money, the data earns money, and that funds flow through back to individual users who may not be crypto savvy.
Which is the most beautiful thing of all, right? Because I always tell people, DeFi is awesome, because we're kind of bridging that gap, that wealth gap.
Yep.
But data monetization is even better because you do not actually need wealth to generate more wealth. You just have the data, which will create wealth for you. Right?
Correct. Your social graph, your identity, connected, quantified self. Everything that you do generates data and is valuable to somebody. And in my mind, we hear a lot about UBI, Universal Basic Income. There are certain aspects of that I agree with and certain aspects I disagree with. The part I disagree with is some sort of top-down government tax the rich, put it into the other people. I think that type of centralized control isn't ideal. If we can unlock data from all different aspects, monetize it, and then pass through back the revenue from that, that's UBI from bottom up. And I think that's much more sustainable. It gives people motivation, and it gives them hopefully some earnings so that they can sustain themselves.
Amazing. So Bruce, my final question. It's the same question I asked you at Blocktown Conference virtually. What is the most meaningful last message you'd like to share with the community out there?
If you compare where crypto is to the internet, we're at about 1997. We're at about 150 million users globally, 150 to 200 million users. That's essentially internet in 1998. And if you look at the internet from 1998 to now, that's 24 years. How far have we come? How much value has been created? It's immense. It's absolutely immense. And so all I can say is get involved in some way. Join a community, learn more, just buy a little bit of Bitcoin every single month, $50, whatever. But start participating in it because this is the first technology that anyone on Earth can participate in with no barriers. It's not controlled by governments, it's not controlled by large companies, and we all have an equal shot at it. So take your shot.
Take your shot. The 3 words that you guys heard that. Here with Bruce from Ocean Protocol, one of the OGs in this space. Hope you learned a lot, and don't forget to join us every Wednesday. Premiere at a PC near you, 8 o'clock BST. See you next week, guys.